Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Anti-Tech Cast. I'm Griffin, and today I'm joined by Jesse Dustin, the founder of Heartland Goats and heartlandgoats.com, and the author of the new book, The History of Nicholas and the Oracle of Knowledge. Did I get the title right on that?
Yep.
Hi, thanks for coming on, Jesse. How you doing?
Good. Super excited to chat with you guys. I love what you guys are doing, and just keep plugging away.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Yeah. We love what you're doing. Getting the word out there about homesteading and how to do some of these things. You recently, you sent us an article that you wrote about, what is it called? Why and How I Quit Silicon Valley and Started a Goat Farm on homestead.org. A nice little inspirational tale, especially for people that are still living in the cities, still living in tech society and are feeling a lot of these same things and maybe don't know how to go about getting out of the system. So I guess could you tell us a little? Obviously you're out on a goat farm now in the Sierra Mountains, right?
So I grew up during the when computers were coming out big. My first computer was an Apple IIgs, and then I had a Tandy Sensations. It was a Windows 3.1 computer, and I was just a young guy who fell in love with technology and such. And all through high school, I was like that computer nerd in the back room, working away on the computer. My senior project at high school, it was me and a Japanese foreign exchange student. We built some computers for our high school project, I used to love technology. I had big libertarian dreams for, the Wild West of information. After high school, I went to, I grew up in New England and Massachusetts, and I went to Institute of Technology in Boston there. And I graduated with a computer engineering degree. And I was like, I'm going to be a tech worker, I'm going to be an engineer the rest of my life. Right. And I really loved music. Music was kind of my thing. And so I worked for, my longest stint was almost 10 years at a company called Avid Technology. And they make Pro Tools and Media Composer and all the equipment that goes into making mass produced media. And I liked working there. I liked being an engineer, but it's like, I think that as engineers, we had like these big utopian ideas, wanted to, bring open source software to the masses and things like that. And over time, it's like the product owners get involved, the product managers get involved, the marketing people get involved. And it's just, we had good notions of how technology and music can be better. But just look around you today. I don't think many people would say that the music world's gotten much better. And my mentor at the time, a guy named Rob Silfast, who works at Apple now, he recruited me and a couple other guys to leave Avid Technology and go. We started a research and development office in Silicon Valley, and we were doing work for Gibson guitars and these big players in the music industry. And it was while I was working in Silicon Valley, I just kind of, it's just no place to live. It's no place to start a family. It's just, being stuck in some little dingy apartment that costs, $2,000 a month. It just didn't make sense. And at some point, there was another kid from Massachusetts. He had a website from insidethebox.com, and he was this kid that was working at Google, and he moved into a box truck in the work parking lot to try to save money. And I was like, dude, that's genius. I can get out of my apartment. I'm just going to go buy a camper and I'll live in the work parking lot. And that was kind of I had no plans to start a farm. I had no idea of this stuff. I was just trying to save up some FU money to get the hell out of Silicon Valley. But it was kind of living in that camper and living a minimalist life in that camper. I realized that I didn't need much stuff to be happy. I realized that I didn't need all these bells and whistles, all this technology that surrounded me.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that I never wanted, now that I lived in a camper, I never wanted to be around the Bay Area. I never wanted to be around San Francisco. Any free time I had, I was off in a canyon, off in some mountain somewhere. And I just felt more at peace amongst nature. And it just made me sad that how much humans have disconnected themselves from that type of stuff. It's like everyone thinks they need a TV or YouTube or whatever. Everybody thinks they need a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinks that they need all these comforts to be happy. And I just found that I was much more happy with less stuff and in nature and away from all that technology. At some point I ditched my smartphone and I got a flip phone, and
nice.
And I just found I had more time to read and write, and I met my wife, and we have 2 sons now, and I guess I just kind of questioned all the stuff I was brought up believing in. And during this journey, it's like I could see little pieces of this. When I was in Massachusetts, I actually interviewed with Ray Kurzweil.
Oh, wow.
Because I was like, oh, Kurzweil, he makes keyboards and pianos. I love that. And then I go to interview and it's like, wait a minute,
no.
He doesn't make pianos anymore? It's like he's some kind of transhumanist, it's like, he's one of those guys that's pushing this kind of Huxley Brave New World.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I'm sure, as you know, I started reading Uncle Ted Kaczynski there, and Ellul and Rene Guénon and all sorts of stuff. And even like some more modern writers like Chris Smage is a guy who wrote a book called Small Farm Future, maybe a year or 2 ago. And it's just a whole nother point of view. He's a British, I think, sociologist, and he's just saying, the only way out of this mess is if everyone starts having small farms, And it just became more and more obvious to me. I read Pentti Linkola and all these guys, and I never had time to read this stuff when I was working in Silicon Valley. I never had time to think about the stuff. I was just too busy. I was busy, working on projects, working on stuff to line people's pockets with,
right.
And it's just so, I think when I have this discussion with people, most people are nodding their head in agreement. Most people get this stuff. It's like, there's some percentage of the population that doesn't get it, probably never will, but especially since COVID and whatnot, people totally understand what I'm saying. So it's just it's so obvious to everyone now that we're kind of becoming slaves to technology. We thought that the technology would help drive humanity, and it's the other way around. It's like the technology is enslaving us. The cheap, shiny baubles and trinkets from overseas. Everyone realizes this stuff. It's just, are you willing to step out of it? Right. Smartphones and technology, it's kind of fractured our culture. It's fractured our country. It's turned us all into these little, what pleasure are you partaking in today, sir? The jouissance, as the French or Zizek would call it. It's like we only know what pleasure we enjoy. That's like the nation in itself. It's just kind of sad. And I guess now it's like my goal is to be an example for other people to follow, that there's a way out of this, that you don't need to become a slave to the machine like we've become.
Yeah, it's not as required as it seems like it actually is. I know that like I agree with you. A lot of people seem, you know, a lot of people are nodding their heads. Everybody seems to be kind of aware of the issues that are at play, but there seems to be also be this like paralysis that's happening where even though people are aware of what the issues are, they still can't pull away. Most people still can't find a way to pull away. Maybe I don't know if it's like the social connections that they've made through technology, and so they feel that they have to keep it around in order to keep those connections. Is there like a core
Sure.
reason in your view that is like why many people are having trouble taking that first step, even though they see what the issues are? What do you think is keeping most people back?
I can just say for myself, if I had never embraced a minimalist lifestyle, if I had never moved in that camper, I think I would have remained a slave to that system. I think that people are in their comfort zone. You know, they like sitting in their lazy boy. They like watching their TV, and people are unwilling to change. They're unwilling to step out of that. You
Mhm.
know, I think that the consumer culture has done a great job of placating people, keeping them docile, keeping them entertained so they don't ask too many questions. And I think a lot of it is the politics keeps people entertained. A lot of people, you know, they're caught up into this politics stuff, and I
Oh
used
yeah.
to be as well, you know. And I think that it's like, I think people think that like, oh, the government is in control or something, and I think it's the technology and the media. It's like they drive the daily narrative, they drive the daily train wreck, and it keeps people entertained.
Mhm.
And that's it, you know. I'm not one of those like doomsdayer guys. I don't think there's going to
Right.
be some cataclysmic event. I think that it's just the death by a thousand cuts, just the drip 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 of just an erosion of humanity. You know, I watched your interview with West Northwest, and yeah, I mean, it's like the mind is under attack. um
Mhm.
you know, she was talking about how, you know, people are just staring at cameras now, and I appreciate that she used a phone call to
Yeah.
call in. And it's just, you know, like she said, you know, technology is replacing us with itself. um and yeah, there's a large percent of the population that is too far gone. I guess where maybe I disagree a little bit with West Northwest is I do think that each person can do something by themselves to make a difference.
Mhm.
You know, I think that as more people do something else and others see that example, um, you know, they'll start switching over to the other side. Another group of people I always bring up in these discussions is we're all torn up about politics and all these things going on in our world. I don't think the Amish give two crap about any of this stuff.
Right.
You know, they're off living their life, doing their thing. And I, you know, there's a lot of people in some more extreme circles, and they're like, oh, you can't go start a farm, you know, you'll be Ruby Ridged, you know. And it's like,
Mhm.
the Amish haven't been Ruby Ridge since the 1600s, people.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this idea that you know, there's a lot of doomers out there, and they basically, a lot of them are like, you can't do that. You can't go start a goat farm. That's impossible.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that we just need more examples of people doing this stuff. And there's, you know, there's plenty of people doing it. There's plenty of examples out there. We just need to showcase them and highlight them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I like to think that that's what we're trying to do is highlight some of these cases and
Yeah.
get some of those examples out there more so people can see them. And you know, I definitely I agree with your sentiment that I feel like we've talked with a bunch of people that have this feeling, you know, they want to escape the system. They want to like start some kind of small form community. They want to have some kind of like maybe even to use like I don't know if this term is the best, but like some kind of commune or a farm, or so just kind of like smaller, close knit community. Try to get further towards that end of the spectrum. But a lot of people are, it seems, are kind of like discouraged from that. they hear stories of these other communes that try to get started and how they eventually, get shut down by the government or whatnot, or they find that they aren't able to detach themselves from the system as much as they want to. They still like have to, get some supplies every once in a while from town, and so they're not getting like the full the full separation that they're looking for. And so so then they're kind of like left in a state of paralysis too. But I think that what you're doing, like even I don't know if those types of people would think that your path is as extreme as they want it to. I think it's still going in the right direction, and it's still yeah.
It's interesting because like you mentioned communes and stuff, and like my background, I was a technology libertarian guy. When I thought of kind of leaving that world, for me, it's like, oh, I'm gonna go galt, man, and when I did it, that's when I started thinking about, I guess I started thinking about the Amish a lot, and I started thinking about how they really have created their own parallel society, and I don't want to gloss over that they have issues too.
Right.
I've talked to people in the Amish community, and the biggest roadblock to an Amish couple getting married and their happiness is that the Amish man finds technology, and it's actually porn is the biggest separating point in Amish marriages. And, you find this stuff out and it's like, yeah, so, I mean, technology is screwing them over too.
Yeah.
Technology, it's not just destroying our culture, it's destroying all the cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we tend to focus on our own, and it's all of them. And it's just, it breaks my heart to hear this stuff and to find out that technology is creeping into that community as well. But, Silicon Valley and the technologists, they're leading the charge for a self-centered life, a life built around whimsical pleasures, whim worshiping, a life of jest. So you don't notice the real issues. And, everything is replaceable now. Smartphones, cars, the endless scrolling. I think that as a young libertarian, I thought that the internet would be the Wild West, and it was turned into Las Vegas. It was turned into Las Vegas, always online, in your pocket, used to enslave your mind. So it's just kind of, a wise man once said, like, don't always assume that what's labeled as progress and innovation is really that. Sometimes without realizing it, we're not going forward, we're actually going backwards. And people think that it's inevitable that things are improving. And that's an illusion in a lot of cases. You start reading this stuff, books from the 1800s, and you're like, they were grappling with these same issues, these exact same issues. And it almost, you get the feeling that the people that were on the other side, on our side, they lost. Mm-hmm. And, it's like other people said, the people's power process is gone. People are stuck in surrogate activities. Mm-hmm. And that's no world to raise children in. It's not a cohesive world for a family. And, that's just kind of how I came to this conclusion.
Yeah, no, it is sad. I know you've mentioned a couple times about how like you met your wife after you started living in the camper and kind of going along this path, right? I'm curious just because like, I think a lot about, my family is still very much living in the tech system. You know what I mean? And
mine too.
Yeah. And so like, I guess I wanted to ask like, what kind of struggles or difficulties did you face when you were trying to like follow this journey and this path of like exiting the tech system? Were there like some relationships that you had to abandon? Did it make it harder to communicate with some people that you didn't want to let go of? Or like what kind of issues do you think you faced there?
No, I haven't had any issues like that. I mean, the
That's
only
good.
ongoing issue is when you talk to people in that outside world, 90% of the time they want to tell you about something they watched on TV. And you're
Yeah.
just like, I haven't had a Netflix subscription or HBO Max for 5 years. I have no idea what you're talking about, you know? No, most people, when you explain this to them, they get it. They're just unwilling to disconnect from it.
Yeah.
So, it's like I was asked, someone asked me recently, well, did any of your Silicon Valley folks, did they give you a hard time? And it's interesting. I had to think about it, and my first reaction was no. When I told people what I was doing, they were like, "Right on, man, that's awesome." But then thinking about it some more, it's like I had some old college buddies come by my farm recently, and I was explaining this to some of them, and one of them, I mean, you could tell that he was so into the technology world, he just didn't even want to hear it. Didn't, like, how, there's nothing wrong with watching porn all the time, man. I mean, what are you talking about? It's just like, and I'm just, so there's a lot of people that are just followers. And until there's a critical mass of people that have disconnected, they're always going to be defending that kind of dystopian world they live in. And I think part of it is admitting that it's that the technology taking over our lives is wrong. It's too much for them to bear, because that would be admitting that a lot of what they've done in their life was a waste of time. And I think for some people it's a tough one to admit. And I'm more than willing to admit that I wasted a lot of my life, watching stupid stuff, doing unproductive things. And when I started like writing a lot and writing a book, people were like, how long did it take you to write that book? And I was like, oh, just a couple months. And they're like, how did you have the time to do that? And it's like, well, I don't have a smartphone. I don't, what else am I going to do? I mean, so, it's just, there's naysayers out there, but I find they're few and far between that people, like I said earlier, especially since COVID, I think before COVID, this, I almost think it's divine that I disconnected from society in 2018, because like before COVID, this kind of was a hard argument to make to some people. After COVID, most people get it.
That's interesting. So I guess I wanted to ask you, because you dropped out before COVID, so to speak. How did COVID affect you, or how was your experience with what went on? Was it like I'm sure it was drastically not as dramatic as what most people went through. But
until I left the farm, I had no clue what was going on out there. And still today, like, I'll go places and I'm like, I just can't believe this is still happening. I'm surprised that people are still wearing masks and such. I just, it's like, there was a meme going around during COVID. It was a picture of some Amish people, and it was like, hey, how's COVID affecting your community? And the caption on the guy was like, it isn't, we don't have a TV. And that's pretty much what it was like. I would go out into the world and people would tell me these updates, and I'm just like, wow, man, I can't
crazy.
believe people. It's crazy. I can't believe people are still falling. I mean, it's interesting too. It's like, I get the feeling that, and I've always had this feeling that like Europe, it's like they're in a tougher spot in some case. It's like, if you really want to meet some doomers out there, go talk to some Europeans. And But on the flip side, it seems like America is way more corporate.
Hmm.
And it's like, it seems like Americans are way more, hey, yeah, we got to get the 5th, 6th booster. And it seems like I feel like Europeans are starting to be like, wait a minute, like, what's going on? You know, all these boosters can't be good for our immune system, you know? So I don't know. It's like, I feel like different parts of the world are slightly more accelerationist than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like almost in America, it's like, it's the corporations rule, you know, there's not much more to it, you know?
Right. It's not a democracy. It's a corporatocracy.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, you know, that was for me at least, being a former libertarian, that was kind of the last kind of eye-opening thing for me was just kind of just even in Ted's manifesto, how could conservatives embrace technology and not think that it would destroy any sort of traditional life that they wanted? You know, it was, you know, so it's just kind of, you know, there's certain things that I think for different people are eye-opening, and that was one for me.
Yeah. I think it you know, you said COVID has been eye-opening for a lot of people. It seems like, I don't know, right now it's getting a lot more intense. It looks like, at least in Michigan, we're going to be going into another lockdown. People all over the place are getting infected. It's crazy. You know, due to technology, it's allowed really dense populations and really high populations to live in areas so it transmits really quickly. And then you get all this misinformation being spread around because now everybody talks via Twitter, and nothing is verified. And so like the truth gets lost, and more people get infected because of that. And yeah, and then so it's like, who knows what's real anymore. And so we're just get lost, and then people just like kind of it's like a learned helplessness, you know, that they kind of fall back into.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, COVID was like, for I'm not an accelerationist. I'm probably what you'd call a decelerationist.
mm-hmm.
But COVID was the accelerationist's wet dream.
Yeah.
It pushed the world forward 5 to 10 years at least.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're only going to get more of them, more pandemics, whether they're of a disease variety or a technological variety or nuclear or some other type of thing. It seems like that's the kind of path that we're going down. I did have a question. You mentioned earlier when you're talking about the Amish, and you mentioned like Mennonites in your book, and I like that as an example. I haven't really, interestingly enough, I feel like I haven't heard people refer to the Amish very much when talking about these things, but they're totally like, yeah, they totally have built their own parallel society. They're living a non-tech life within a technical nation, and so it's like, it's crazy. And but you said how, like, you know, how tech is kind of encroaching on them a little bit too. I wonder, is there any kind of like tech that's been encroaching on you since you've kind of started this farm and stuff? It's like some kind of technological dangers that you still have to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, the downside of COVID is when I moved out here and I bought land, the land prices were fairly stable in rural areas. COVID seems like it's pushed. I mean, I think I'm stuck here because I would never be able to leave, because it seems like, and I saw it during COVID, properties near me that have gone undeveloped for hundreds of years were just started being bought up. People started paying the asking price. People stopped haggling. And it seems like that overinflated land price of California has now spread. The Californians are spreading to, you know, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Idaho, and it saddens me that it's becoming harder to do what I've done. I just, you know, I remember looking at prices in Idaho years ago, and they're double, triple, quadruple what they were pre-COVID. So it's I joke with people now, maybe it's time to start looking south of the border at Mexico. Maybe maybe it's time to start looking at South America or something. And I actually talked to someone from Argentina recently, and he led me to believe that the land prices weren't that much lower. So,
Oh, wow.
So it seems like the COVID has accelerated the push for people to exit the cities.
Mm-hmm.
One possible good outcome would be, I don't know. I have no insight into this. Is there going to be some kind of renaissance in the cities? Is the city becoming not an attractive place?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I wouldn't put any bets on that personally. But yeah, I mean, what technology is interrupting my life? Nothing really, other than COVID made people go a little crazy and want to flee the city faster. And so, the Amish, another guy from Silicon Valley that will occasionally mention the Amish too is Curtis Yarvin. I don't know if you're aware of his work.
No.
He points out, and I find this too, that people have measured the happiness levels of different cultures. And they find that the Amish, and for whatever reason, billionaires, have similar happiness levels. So, once again, it's you look out there at these statistics and you see that there's reasons to think that the technology is making us less happy, less fulfilled, and there's a reason to think that. And I'm sure there's plenty of things that the Amish do that would shock us. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, the Amish get together as a group and they decide which technology to use. And you and I can't imagine letting my fellow man have that kind of control over myself. Mm-hmm. But can you imagine what kind of trust a culture has when there's no lawyers? I mean, we can just negotiate about something in good faith without getting the government involved, without getting lawyers involved. Mm-hmm. So, I just like pointing to the Amish as they're kind of one of my test points. Well, how do they handle the situation? And since I've kind of looked into it and talked with some of them, I'm blown away by how different groups of Anabaptists and Mennonites, they've separated from each other because they disagreed over which technology to adopt. There's a group of Anabaptists that live out in California, and they allowed them to drive vehicles. And that was a separating point with some of their other groups. And some of them have started using smartphones and technology and things like that. But the point is that they get together as a group and they decide which technology to use. That's something that's totally the opposite of our kind of libertarian, freedom loving, go consume what you want culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like it's really interesting. You say that, and I immediately think that, like, part of the reason that I think that is because the Amish culture is just smaller in size too. There's less people like meeting around it as a group and deciding on anything when you have a group of 300 versus a group of like 300,000 is, it's just like untenable at that point. And technology allows that groups of that size to exist. And then it tries to facilitate ways to get those people to interact. And then you lose all of this human interaction that's going on. Yeah.
On the flip side, because of technology, their birth rate is so high that some people project if they continue on their current path, that in, I don't know if it's 100 years or 200 years, their population will outgrow the rest of us. I don't know if I believe this stuff. I'm just telling you what's out there,
Yeah.
So, it's because, because the mortality rate of, their children is low now, technology. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's the catch 22 of all of these things. You know, nobody wants children to die, but when we invent all of these things and all these medicines and have all these systems in place, it allows for the destruction of the natural world. And
Yeah,
the
and you read like Linkola or guys like this, and they are big into population control and things like that. And perhaps for good reason. I don't, I don't know that I've thought that through, to be honest. But yeah, I guess I'm more of the Uncle Ted theory that we just need to have the right people having children.
Yes. Exactly.
And so that's why I'm big into telling people to go start a farm and stuff like that. And I think that a lot of people think that it's impossible. And I would have thought it was impossible when I was younger. Growing up, I never thought like, oh, you're going to be a goat farmer someday. But there's a whole other aspect of farming and goat farming that I want to get into. It's that when we talk about food, people are so disconnected from what it takes to provide them the food they're eating.
Right.
I think last I looked it up, even the USDA says that I think 40% of all food is thrown in the garbage. And that is so sad to think that there are animals that are living their life and being butchered so that people can throw away their food.
Yeah.
And it's just another reason why I love goats, because Americans never really got into goats. Goats have never been a main staple. But for these other cultures, and for our culture hundreds of years ago, it was you honored your food. You had a respect for the animals. You used every piece of the animal. You didn't just throw away half the animal and move on with your life. And so I didn't think this was going to happen when I started a goat farm. I didn't think that it would dawn on me that even our food system is so corrupted. I can, if you ever come by my farm, I can bring you to some cattle farms down the street. And I mean, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of cattle in these little pens, fed growth hormones, antibiotics. And I feel like if people in the cities knew the cost to keep them well fed, I know plenty of people that live in the cities, and they're like, well, I got rid of my car, Jesse. I take public transportation. I'm doing everything I can do. Living in the city is good for the environment. If they knew the cost on rural places so that they could throw away 40% of the food.
Yeah.
The last stat I saw, it was like people are spending 40 years of their life watching a screen, staring at a screen. If people knew the cost of all this stuff so they can, stare at a screen all day and eat food, I think they'd be horrified. I think they would. And I would love to give some people these tours. I would love to show them, the cost that it's bearing upon our world, just so they can be ignorant. And I remember talking to a young girl recently, a young girl whose parents are from Mexico, and she was like, "Yeah, I was horrified when my father, killed the goat in front of me." And I just said to her, imagine how horrific if you had no clue the sacrifice that you've been eating meat your whole life and you've not once seen that sacrifice, So that's a whole nother topic that's opened my eyes more recently is the food situation.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about that because I know you raise goat meat and you sell it on your website, and it's all it's from what I can tell all raised very wholesomely, and that's great, and I love that. I know, like I myself, I've definitely seen industrial farming practices as one of the primary components of the tech system that's destroying the planet, and that's hidden away from the public eye so that everyone just keeps feeding it. And so as a result, I became vegan a few years ago. And so I've been vegan for a while, not eating, trying to lessen the support for those kinds of industries and stuff. But at the same time, I'm not like, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with eating meat. It's the fact that there are all these horrible practices going on that are both harmful to sentient beings in extremely sadistic ways, and destroying the planet as the consequence. And so I don't know. I guess I wondered, did you have any thoughts about food when you were still living in the city that maybe changed when you started farming goats? I don't like. Did you have any kind of prior experience with farming practices and how you wanted to do it correctly or something like that?
No, I had zero, I mean, a lot of people think like you have to have some background in this stuff to get into it. I had zero. I mean, my parents grew up in the 60s, and they tried to flee the city.
Mm-hmm.
And for me and my brother, they tried to raise us on a small farm, and it just never worked out for them. They had to get real jobs back in the city. And I guess I never, when I was living in the city, I never thought about any of this stuff. It wasn't until I started farming and I started seeing how other people are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I started seeing how there's tons of small farms out there. They're doing it right. But there's some people, and I don't know if it's low self-esteem or it's just some people, the drive for more and more and more and more. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I know one farmer out here. When I first met him, he had half as many cattle as he has now, and he's making the same amount of money as he was making when he had half as many cattle. It's like our society is telling farmers that you must produce more and more and more to make the same amount of money as you used to.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I just want to sit them down and say to them, listen, you're a farmer, you're a hard worker. I understand that you want to produce more and more and more. The people you're producing for, they hate you.
Yeah.
You're enabling them to live a comfortable life in the city, and you're sacrificing your life. I mean, some of the people, I mean, you've got guys working on at these big industrial feedlots, 10, 11, 12-hour days, 6 days a week. I don't know many Americans that would work under these conditions.
Yeah.
And there aren't many Americans working under these conditions. For the most part, these industrial farms, they're run by immigrants. And I think that if more people knew this, that they would question what it seems like the appetite. I mean, you're a vegan, but it seems like the appetite for meat, it just keeps going up. We as a country make more meat with less animals today than we did 20 years ago. So like there's less cattle in America today than there were 20 years ago, yet we produce more meat. How do we do that? Hormones, antibiotics, packing them in, feeding them corn, feeding them, a high protein, a high energy diet. There's all these drugs on the market, Optaflex, Silmax, these drugs that it like makes their muscles bigger. it's just another reason why I love goats, because goats are like deer. It would be very hard to confine them and feed them. It would be very difficult to industrialize goats.
Interesting.
I think that sheep to some extent are kind of in the middle. Sheep are kind of like docile, like cattle. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. The whole food situation. I think that maybe it's something that people need to talk about more. I know that plenty of environmentalists are talking about it, and the book that I mentioned earlier, Small Farm Future by Chris Smage, that was another good resource on this topic. There's another group in Britain, I think they're called Cabrito goats, and they rescue dairy kids and raise those as meat goats. And so there's people out there doing better things. But at the end of the day, the world's desire for beef and other products is it can't be satisfied. It just keeps going up.
Yeah. Whether it's our appetites or just that the population's going up. And even though it seems like I don't know, at least in some areas, California, I'm sure, Michigan's doing pretty well now as far as like offering vegan options and trying to offer alternatives to meat and things like that. And some people have taken it up, but on the whole, yeah, it's still a huge issue. I'm just wondering, like through farming goats, it's been a couple of years now, right? What else have you noticed about goats in general that you like about that? I don't know if is there anything about the way they behave, their kind of like culture or anything like that? Like I know
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, goats have so much more personality than sheep and cattle. They're very much like deer. The goats I have, they're a bit more feral than other goats. And there's things that you learn about the herd that it's like, it's totally different than our culture. It's like when people are always like, well, what do you, when a goat gets sick, how do you know one's sick? As soon as a goat gets sick, you'll go out and you'll look at your herd and you'll be like, hey, there's that goat that's wandered off. It's like when a goat gets sick, they self-segregate themselves. They don't want to nobody wants to be near them. And so it's quite obvious. Yeah. How considerate. It's quite obvious when there's something wrong with one of your goats because they're off doing their own thing. Watching the whole herd and the culture there, and you change anything, you subtract an animal and you add another animal, and the whole thing changes, the whole hierarchy changes. It's quite a sight to behold. And you'll have certain goats that are just, they're always at the top of the hierarchy and everyone gives them respect. And then you got some goats that nobody ever likes them. Nobody wants to go near them. And you got to, end up getting rid of those goats. And it's like, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, I was talking to someone recently, they said that they were talking to a rabbit farmer, and the biggest issue for the rabbit farmer or getting people into rabbit farming is they're just cute, cuddly little creatures. Nobody wants to kill a rabbit. They're adorable. But it's the idea that I breed my goats. I wouldn't breed them. They have a purpose, and it ends up being that all the males go off and get eaten, and most of the females that are good, you end up keeping them and you raise them to a ripe old age, and they die out in the pasture. And so it's, it's fascinating watching the herd and the dynamic, and you have some goats that are they're living the dream, and they're first at the food trough, and everyone backs away. And another cool thing about raising goats is to keep them protected from predators. We have, the big white Pyrenees goat dogs, and they're just, it's amazing watching, they live with the goats, you raise these dogs with the goats, and they will not leave those goats' side. and all night long they're sleeping with the goats and keeping them protected.
Oh, that's great.
And it's just, I never, you know, I never would have, I was never this in touch with nature. I was never this in touch with animals. And, you know, I think I say to people, it's like, I don't think I would have had children. I don't think I would have, you know, I don't think I would have thought about having children if I was still disconnected from nature. You know, I don't think I would have had that drive to start a family if I was disconnected from nature. So the herd definitely, it gives you a warm and happy feeling, and I love hanging out with the goats. And you know, in a couple months it'll be kidding season again, and there'll be baby goats running everywhere. It's just a good time. It's just a good time, and it's such a good place to raise a child, you know. And is there a ton of money in raising goats? No. You're gonna live a humble life. You're gonna live a pauper's life, but I've never been happier, you know. So
that's great. What it's like, couldn't have been a better endorsement than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's more to life than making money, and I realize that money is important, but it's like I don't have a big savings account, but I got a pasture filled with goats, and it's hard for the government to print goats and inflate the price of goats, you know. So, you know, I look out on my pasture, and that's my savings account, you know.
That's great. Do you you know, you bring that up, you know, are there any you know, is it more stressful than you anticipated as far as like you know, the goats are kind of like your livelihood now? Like, what if something were to happen to them, or I don't know,
I feel like now that we're kind of in our fourth year, I feel like I can kind of gloat about it and have these interviews. And there's another YouTube channel that I watched a bit, is the Unism YouTube channel, and the guy who started that YouTube channel, he went off and bought some land recently, and I just kept telling him, you know, it's like the first 3 years were rough. I mean, you know, there were times when, you know, I had tears coming down my face, and I'm like, what have you done? I mean, there's been really hard times, and that's when I had to, you know, buck up and go do some menial work down at the farm, down the street. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot working at other people's farms. I learned a lot about how, you know, the beef world works and the cattle industry works. And, you know, a lot of people are like, well, do you have a vet? You know, if somebody gets sick, what do you do? I learned this from the cattle industry. If you have a sick animal, you ship them to the auction as fast as you can. You know, it's like people that have pets, you know, they'll bring their dog to the vet and they'll spend thousands and thousands of dollars.
Right.
That ain't going to work on a farm. You know, and like I said, you know, in the cattle world, you get a sick animal, you ship to the auction that day and you get some money out of it. Instead of sinking medicine into it on the hope that it'll live. So yeah, I mean, back to your question, there's been some really hard times, you know, hard moments where, you know, needed to leave the farm and go work somewhere else and make a little bit extra money. But I can say, I tell people, you know, if you want to go start a farm, it's a 4 or 5 year journey. Don't plan on having a lot of revenue coming in until your 4th or 5th year. And especially if you choose livestock, because, you know, we started off with 20, 30 goats. You know, I'd buy a handful of goats here and there. And now after 4 years, you know, we've been breeding them and we have, you know, a lot more goats. And we've been keeping the females every year to breed them out the following year. and this next year we just got too many goats. I need to start selling females and males, so it's a struggle. The first years are real tough, and you're gonna have to go find some off-farm work while you build your dream.
Mm-hmm.
But just and I'm not the only one. Every farmer whose book I've read, they say the same thing. And we have a website where we sell goat meat, but you need to have multiple sources. We sell goats at the auction, we sell goats on Craigslist, we sell meat on our website. This next year, my wife's going to start trying to make goat soap and some candles and other stuff. And so, you just try to focus on one thing and then move on to the next and move on to the next.
Right. Just keep moving. Is there any like big piece of advice or something that you've learned that you wish you knew 4 years ago starting up?
It's like, I tell people this, that when you embark on, when I started this, people were like, oh, ostrich eggs are where it's at. You should raise emus, hops, grow some hops. That's where the money's at. You'll get, even within the goat community, you'll get a million different opinions on everything. Mm-hmm. It's really, you got to try things and figure out what works for you, because what works for somebody else might have no bearing on your environment. I mean, I cannot imagine starting a goat farm where I grew up in the snow. I'd want to kill myself. I wouldn't, if I had to come out every morning and break ice, the waterers, I'd be like, this ain't no life for me.
Yeah. So
it's like, everyone needs to figure out what's your comfort level, what's, what kind of environment are you most happy in, mm-hmm. and figure out what works for you, because you'll get a million different opinions when you talk to people out there about how they did it or things like that.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. So you gotta figure out
my biggest
trial and error.
My biggest advice, and most people probably think I'm crazy, is moving into that camper. Really, for me at least, it made me a different person. It really did. Mm-hmm. I was so coddled. I was coddling myself, living in an apartment, watching TV, doing whatever. And moving into the camper took me out of my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And it was another one of those things, when I did it, I was like, was this the right move, man? I could hardly sleep at night. It's like with all the traffic going by. And that's another reason I found myself driving out to nature. And for me, at least, that was the biggest thing I can say that I ever did that changed my mindset. Mm-hmm. That it forced me to embrace a minimalist life. And if you're not a minimalist, farming ain't going to work out for you, mm-hmm. Unless you want to become an industrial dystopian farmer or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Embracing that minimalist lifestyle is the good first step, you would say. Yeah. For most people.
Yeah, for sure. 100% for me.
That's great. Yeah. And hopefully more people will get on that train. I wanted to ask you, I just before, I know we don't have too much longer, but I just wanted to ask you, just to ask you a little bit about your book. So you recently wrote a novel called The History of, The History of Nicholas and the Oracle of Knowledge. There it is. Got a physical copy right there. Can you tell us a little bit about, what it's about and why you decided to write it?
Yeah, when I started a goat farm, my other goal was to read a lot more, because it just wasn't something I had time to do. And since I left Silicon Valley, I've read more books than I read my entire life. And when you start reading books, you start thinking to yourself, I got some ideas in my head that I want to get out there. And I think, you know, after reading Ted and Elul and Ganon and stuff like that, it's like, I was like, oh, I'm going to write this super intellectual book. It's going to be, and it was actually talking to my parents. My father was like, nobody's going to want to read your manifesto, dude. I mean, he's like, you know, if you want to impact people, fiction's the way to do it. And thinking about what he said, I was like, you know, he's right. I mean, there's so many fictional books that I can remember that are like, yeah, they had way more impact than reading someone's dissertation.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about what kind of book I wanted to write. And we had just had our second son, July of last year. And I also, people are often saying, well, Jesse, you know, this all worked out for you, but what about your children?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of story are you going to tell them? How are you going to explain to them? Because they're going to want to use this stuff. They're going to want to use smartphones. They're going to want to go on the internet. They're going to want to do stuff like that, like you did when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of my thought process was, you know, I want to write a book that explains to them why I did this, why I went down this road, why I gave up a career in computers to go start a goat farm. And so that's what I did. I wrote a book that kind of, it parallels my journey. It parallels, you know, a journey of a guy named Nicholas who falls in love with technology and gets a job working for these technology companies, but kind of sees, you know, there's little pieces of society along the way that, you know, oh, that's interesting. You know, why is it going down like that? And you know, Nicholas moves to the forest and meets a woman, and they start a family. And then it's how does he explain to his children why he left that world? And one of his children ends up getting sucked back into that technological world, and it goes through his kind of trials and travails with escaping from that world. And so, yeah, I just, you know, I was reading a lot and writing. I was writing a lot. I write some blogs for the Unists. They have a little website, and I write some blogs there. And homestead.org picked up one of my articles, and I was just writing a lot. And I tell people, because I'll meet other people that are like, man, I want to write a book too. It's like I started writing a lot, and I wrote kind of two kind of rough stories, and then I kind of scrapped them. Mm-hmm. And I kind of sat down and I wrote this book in like a short time. And I was just like, that was the story I wanted to tell. And then over a couple months, I worked on it and updated it. And actually the guy who runs the Unism YouTube channel proofread it. And it was just kind of, you know, a passion of mine to write about exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
About the struggles of technology and how it's used to control society, how the marketing people, you know, how they'll use all the tricks, the, you know, urgency, you know, you must buy now, you know,
yeah, like I like that little part you had. I just saw that last night. Yeah,
it's like, oh, look at all the likes. Oh, we got this guy, he's a professor speaking from authority. Mm-hmm. And I actually, I don't know that I've ever told this story. When I started, what got me onto that specific topic of the marketing tricks that people use to kind of prey on humans' own frailty and human nature, how they kind of use our own human nature against us to sell us things. It was during COVID. I decided to start my website, heartlandgoats.com, because up until then we had just been selling goats to people, you know, face to face or at the auction. Mm-hmm. And when I looked into, well, how do I promote my website? I had an old friend, his name's Paul, and he's a pretty big trombone player. Mm-hmm. And he had this whole, he basically, he runs a lot of Facebook ads.
Mm-hmm.
And he was explaining to me all the tricks that go into, sucking people in and,
Mm-hmm.
and making them buy your
Clickbait
stuff.
and all that, yeah.
And being an engineer, I was an engineer. I just made technology stuff. I had no idea what the marketing department was doing to foist this upon people.
Mm-hmm.
He opened my eyes to the tricks. And so that, I had to throw that in the book. It just seemed like, it seems like the corporatists, the capitalists, they will use, every trick in the book to make humans think that they really need, whatever they're selling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sick. It's like, I guess that I thought that, being like a young libertarian guy, I thought that humans were a bit more educated and a bit more noble.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing some of the tricks that people are using to run, ads and things like that, it's just, it literally is like a casino. It's exactly how a casino tricks people into walking up to that slot machine and unloading
Mm-hmm.
their money. And it's this desire for people to, it's a desire for people to get their neighbor to gape at them, to, look at my stuff, look at my, look at all this stuff I've acquired. It's the kind of the concept in some circles, like the life of the second hander, and it's just all this stuff. It's like, I wrote this book as kind of a summary, as to how I got here. And I hope people read it. And I've been promoting it everywhere I can, and people have been buying it, and everyone who's read it has really enjoyed it. So I started working on a sequel recently, and I'm just going to keep doing it. I'm just going to keep, my plan is to keep writing, a book every year or something until I die. And, if people eventually hopefully get this message.
That's great. That's awesome. And I definitely can't recommend the book enough. It's a great heartfelt tale, but also kind of like a modernized 1984, just in the way you describe this Valley of the Silicons. The terminology used is very clever too. I'm loving it.
A big author that inspired me is a guy named Hermann Hesse, late 1800s, early 1900s. I pretty much read every book he had ever written, and you'll see elements of that in here. I just loved his kind of youthful storytelling and like a boy's journey into the world, and so he was definitely a huge inspiration.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Siddhartha was a big one for me too. Growing up, it's
I tried. Yeah, Siddhartha. That whole element, how the young Siddhartha goes to the kind of the pleasure city, and he's with that woman, and that was kind of an element. I was like, man, I loved kind of incorporating that into this book with the twins and all that, and I'm glad that you read most of the book.
Yeah, so I'm going to be finishing tonight. Trust me. Just been reading a lot of other stuff too. Sometimes it takes me a while. I'm actually I'm really not a very fast reader, honestly. Like I've been like studying philosophy, and I'm so slow getting through some of these novels and stuff.
Yeah, me neither. It's like some people. I gave my book to somebody, and like they call me back. Oh, I finished reading it, and I'm like, how the hell did you read it so fast? Yeah. It's like I think that when I read, I'm a slow reader because I'm really trying to take in what the author's telling me.
Same.
And I think some people just blast through reading material. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, I'm probably half as, I take twice as long as most people take to read a book, and because I'm savoring every moment of it,
Yeah. There's definitely value in both sides of it. I envy those that can speed read, but maybe they're not absorbing as
Yeah,
much.
I think they're not absorbing it. That's my
Yeah.
theory. I think they're not getting it completely, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some things you can't help but speed read, you know. There's some things that are so good
Right.
that they're just page turners. But you know, and I really think that, you know, more people, since I've written this book, a couple of people have contacted me that, oh yeah, I got the ideas, and I encourage people to run with them. I mean, I'm not a super creative guy. I mean, my book's fairly creative, but some of these sci-fi ideas that some people have, I mean, they're just way more creative than I ever could be. And so I just applaud people to it's like embody and live the life that you dream of, you know, because people are going to see that, and people are going to want to emulate that. And it's like, I think often people think that nobody's doing this, and so I can't do it. And people need to break out of that mold. People need to step up and be leaders, you know.
Yeah. Do the things that the Facebook posts are about, not the Facebook, like don't do the Facebook posts. Yeah.
Right.
Totally. Well, I definitely encourage people to read your book as in a slow manner, as a piece of philosophy. I really do think that you're expressing some ideas that are worth sitting and mulling over and contemplating and trying to draw into your own life.
Yeah, and like I remember when I gave it to Nathan of the Unism channel to proofread, it was like he read it, and there was some references that totally went over his head. It's like, what is up with this burning effigy thing? And I'm like, bro, it's Burning Man. Come on.
It's great.
And then he's like, maybe you should expand on what are these rebels that come and take down these obelisks? What are you getting at there? And I'm, bro, it's 9/11. Come on. So it's just, yeah, I think there's a lot in there that people can take in. And one of my favorite things when I read books is I love finding new words. And when I read, I like to write down all the new words I find, and I put them all in there, you know. All the new words that I found in books, they're all in that book. So if people want to find some new words in there, they're in there.
Yeah, totally. Expand your vocabulary a little bit on top of it.
Yeah.
Enjoy a nice myth and expand your vocab. But yeah, for those that aren't aware, I'll post the links in the description, but Jesse's offering the first 8 chapters for free. Just shoot him an email and you can grab that. And or you can also purchase the book. And if you can purchase a physical copy for 50% off with the code ATC. And thanks again for throwing that on there, helping out.
Yeah, and we haven't launched. I've just been self-publishing and self-releasing it. We haven't launched it on Amazon or any of these book services. So, I mean, maybe someday I'll go down that dark road of the Kindle platform. But right now, we're just selling it ourselves, and you know, we've got a digital copy and a physical copy, and I've gotten a couple comments from people that are like, "Man, I'm glad you're selling a digital EPUB, you know, copy. I don't have to go to, you know, Amazon and get one." And so I hope people appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I think they do. We need to hop off of Jeff Bezos's train for a minute, for sure.
Yeah. The only people that are going to dislike this book are Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and these kind of guys. They're not going to like it much. But
yeah, no, but they are the ones that most need to read it, probably.
Probably.
Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, I'll I don't want to keep you from your family and the goats for too long. Thanks again for coming on and talking with me for a while. Is there anything, any last words of advice or any message you want to send to the public before we sign off?
No, I mean, I appreciate the Anti-Tech Collective and what you guys are doing, and I applaud it. You know, I love Chad Haig and David Skrubina and all, you know, West Northwest gave a great interview with you guys recently. And you know, I love your website, what you guys are doing. Just keep pushing ahead, Griffin, and just keep doing what you're doing, because, you know, myself and guys like you were an important part of the step for people to get the hell out of the dystopia that Silicon Valley wants for the world.
Yeah, totally. Thank you very much for the support. And yeah, we want to support you as well. And hopefully we can talk to you again one day. Maybe we'll talk some more about your book another time. If
Anytime,
you'd be
man.
down for that. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again, Jesse, and we'll catch you later, I guess.